the Dutch East India Company. Once the fleet dropped anchor in Table Bay, Phillip sent King, the aide-de-camp, ashore to negotiate with the foreigners. Phillip asked King to visit the governor and gain permission for the fleet to remain in Table Bay and to take on all the supplies they needed for the settling of Botany Bay.
But Governor van der Graaf was not at all helpful. The British had tried to take the Cape during the American War, and he knew it would not be long before they tried again. The Dutch East India Company itself was going bankrupt for want of British bank loans, and the company had appointed van der Graaf. He stalled, saying that there were few supplies available, and that anyway the town council would have to agree to the fleet's request. The council also prevaricated. Phillip decided that the fleet's needs were so urgent that he must find independent merchants willing to do business with him for hard cash. At the house of the De Wet family, he found what he needed.
Once the De Wets helped them get permission for supplying the fleet, the De Wets then provided them with the meat, the greens, the fresh fruit, the wines, the brandies, and most importantly of all for the new colonies starting afresh, the seeds that they would need to become self-sufficient in New South Wales.
The fleet also bought livestock, which they hoped would breed in the new land. There were always a few live animals on board to be slaughtered and eaten during a voyage. But now they squeezed into the ships 44 sheep, 6 cows, 2 bulls and 28 large hogs. It was a Noah's Ark menagerie, topped up with 1 stallion, 3 mares and 3 colts. To make room, the convicts were rearranged, and Phillip even dismantled the guns on board HMS Sirius. After all, the fleet should be safe from any military threat in the empty waters which lay ahead. Every remaining nook and cranny was then stuffed with fruit and veggies. After 3 busy weeks in Cape Town Harbour, the fleet finally lumbered away from their last contact with civilization on the 12th of November and fought against the winds around the Cape.
They did eventually round the Cape of Good Hope, but they'd lost so much time doing it and eaten into so many of their precious supplies doing it that Phillip decided he'd now have to split up the fleet. So he gathered the fastest ships together, left the heavier ones behind, and set off as quickly as he could for the long run down to Botany Bay.
Now they were really on their own, beyond the routes plied by other ships, beyond the means of sending dispatches or receiving news, heading day by day towards the violent storms of the roaring 40s. Officers began to get seasick, let alone the convicts below decks. Soon, the animals were being thrown about and injured, and sails blown to pieces. Lieutenant Collins managed to scrawl miserably in his diary. All communication with family and friends now cut off. We are leaving the world behind us to enter on a state unknown. Indeed, the heart of Australia was unknown. No explorer had been more than about 5 miles inland. From the coast, Cook and Banks had reported strange plants, which grew nowhere else on Earth, and even stranger animals. All London had vaguely heard of the kangaroo. Cook and Banks had also observed the natives. To Cook, the Aborigines seemed fearless but timorous and inoffensive. So Banks thought they might have frequent wars. Cook said they may appear to some to be the most wretched people on Earth, but in reality they are far more happier than we Europeans. They seemed to set no value on anything we gave them. All they seemed to want was for us to be gone. But now, after 18 years, the British were returning, to claim the land in the name of King George III and to found a settlement for their convicts.
I tell you freely, now I shall recommend you as objects of mercy. But your characters, I'm sure, are bad. Therefore, the utmost that you can expect is to be sent abroad.
Inexorably, the fleet sailed closer to their goal. Despite 2 months of navigating through storms, they knew precisely where they were, and rounded the tip of Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania, on January the 3rd. Then, turning north and struggling against the winds, they headed for Botany Bay. On January the 14th, 1788, HMS Supply and the leading division of the fleet arrived off the heads, but the winds prevented them getting into the bay for 4 days. By the time the wind changed, the second division of the fleet had arrived and they all went in more or less together. Lieutenant Bradley painted them doing so. Botany Bay, which Cook and Banks had described as a place with a fine climate, soil fit for the cultivation of all sorts of European crops and plenty of water. But once on shore, Phillip and his officers looked and were appalled. The anchorage was poor, the soil sandy, and above all, there was very little water. For a while, it looked as if the whole venture could be a disaster. There had to be somewhere better. While the fleet waited anxiously, Phillip set off northwards to check on the inlet which Cook had named Port Jackson but not entered. To everyone's relief, he returned 3 days later with the news that Port Jackson was the finest harbour in the world. The fleet set off immediately. Then, at the very mouth of the bay, 2 large ships were sighted. For a moment, they were amazed, and then concerned. The ships flew French colours. Fortunately, they turned out to be a friendly scientific expedition under Jean de la Pérouse. Phillip greeted him with a sigh of relief, then pressed on. There was no time to lose. It was now 9 weeks since leaving Cape Town. Water was running out and fresh food had gone long ago. Everyone was hungry for the land. After the disappointment of Botany Bay, Port Jackson offered hope for a settlement, only a short distance up the coast. On the 26th of January, Bradley painted the fleet at its journey's end. On a voyage of 8.5 months since leaving Portsmouth, not one ship had been lost. Here was the finest harbour in the world, which Phillip would rename Sydney after the Home Secretary back in London who had given him command. Sydney, where today, on the 26th of January, modern Australians, some of them descended from people who arrived on the first fleet that day, 200 years ago, reenact the historic arrival. The naval officers and marines came ashore in boats, with their uniforms, their shoes, their wigs and hats, with their muskets, their discipline, their memories of England, and their proclamation claiming Australia for God and their King. On that day, 200 years ago, the Aborigines melted away into the bush, but today it's another matter.
The Aborigine owns this country! Is this all it takes to get a country? Bring a boat on and plant a flag! No, owns this country, don't you? Don't you, eh? What about land rights for the blacks? You took it all and won't give any back!
In a sense, all it did take to own Australia was to plant a flag and establish a government. But surviving was not so easy. especially as the first settlers learned so little from the Aborigines. They began by clearing the ground and planting European crops. Phillip was an experienced farmer, but few of the other naval officers, marines or convicts had any useful knowledge. And it was touch and go for nearly 3 years before the first settlement was secure. But that is another story.
Farewell to old London forever. Farewell to my rum velvet well. Farewell to the well-known Old Bailey, where I used for the cats up to swell. Singing to a lie, you a lie at a day. Singing to a lie, you a lie, yay. Singing to a lie, you a lie at a day. We're bound for Botany Bay. Now all of my duties and justices, take warning from what I can say. Mind what is your own that you duchesses, or you'll find us in Botany Bay. Singing to a lie, you a lie at a tea. Singing to a lie, you a lie down.